Sounds like that'll do it.
Okay. All right. I think says it's recording. All right. So are you seeing the shared screen meeting process? Yes.
Yeah, looks good from here.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right. So um just briefly where we're at in the process. So we're now working on we've posted the draft bylaw and which includes the policies, specific policies and recommendations. And this is phase 3 of community engagement. And then later this fall, there will be a public hearing. And phase 3 of community engagement is this virtual open house. Then we got the open house at the Masonic Hall tomorrow afternoon into the evening. We'll post some key questions online tomorrow, so and those will be open for comment until the end of the month. And as I said, there's a public hearing later this fall. So yeah, need for a new OCP. Why are we going through this? Probably fairly evident, but yeah, the existing one dates to 2014. So all the data that we have is quite old. It was actually 2011 census data. So it was really time to update just based on uh, changes to the population and the community that have happened since 2016. We've had a lot of population growth since 2016, and I put up that little graphic there so you can see where we've been and where we expect it to be in about 23 years in 2043. Uh, so there's quite a significant growth that we've had in the past and continuing. We've also had the province has issued new requirements for municipalities. We have to show how OCP meets the housing need. Municipalities produce a housing needs report every 5 years, and that has to be reflected in the OCP. And I have a separate slide on that. We needed to update our policies to reflect the current plans that Council has adopted or accepted, such as our climate action plan, which was accepted by Council in 2024. We have a draft liquid waste management plan with recommendations. We completed a transportation master plan in 2024 as well. So all those policies are then also transported into the OCP. The OSP needs to respond to changing community needs, such as housing, food security, local economy. There's a need to seek to manage the growth that we're experiencing sustainably. So how are we going to grow best? And I have quite a few slides on the land use designations, which are part of managing growth. As I said, climate actions and greenhouse gas emission targets. And our need for being on top of the current data. So yeah, the new provincial regulations, some of you are probably familiar with these. The province has asked all local governments to meet the housing need that's identified in their last housing needs report. And we need to identify meet our 5 and 20-year housing need. I've got that graph there on the side, and they count from 2021. So that's the last census. So that's why it says 358 units by 2026, and some of those have been built. And then by 2041 would be 1,350 units that Cumberland would have to build or seek to provide opportunity to build. And the OCP meets this through an expanded residential infill area, multi-unit residential and mixed-use land use designation, and a mixed-use civic facilities designation. And then we also have another provincial requirement, which Cumberland actually doesn't have to quite meet yet. If population's over 5,000, you have to meet the small-scale multi-unit housing regulations as the province added to the Local Government Act. And that means all areas previously designated and zoned for single detached housing units are eligible for have to permit up to 4 units to be built on those properties. So that's infill. Cumberland's already had an infill area for quite a long time where we permitted up to 3 units. the main dwelling, a secondary suite, and an accessory dwelling unit, a laneway house in the back. So it's not a terribly big change for us, the new infill requirement. And as I said, we don't need to meet that quite yet, but in 2026, and at the time of the new census, we expect to reach over 5,000. So we're doing this, implementing this as part of this OCP review. So yeah, and then whoopsie, I was a little too quicker. Are there any questions at this point? I'm just looking at the chat. I don't see any, so I think I'll
No,
keep
nothing, no questions in the chat yet.
Okay, so I'll keep going. So this is now about the land use, which is a big part of the OCP. So the OCP designates the future land use that is permitted on a property. So a future development potential, you could say, that you have on your property. And for example, if you currently were maybe just some designations, for example, might be a multifamily for a previous. Ooh,
Sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
There was a question there from Matthew. What qualifies as a unit?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so a unit is any type of housing unit. So it's not specified that it has to be a single residential, detached single family dwelling or an apartment. A housing unit, I suppose, would be the better word. Yeah, so in a mixed use land use designation, a housing unit would most likely be an apartment above a ground floor commercial use.
I guess I have a follow-up question. Would there be a maximum number of people in a unit, or would it just be it's a fairly vaguely defined standard?
Yeah, so the OCP doesn't. It has a kind of it has a fairly general density description, and that's in the land use designation descriptions. But it doesn't. It really comes down to the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw will implement the official community plan, and the zoning bylaw will get into the specifics of how many units might be permitted in a specific zone. So the OCP just lays the groundwork for what kind of land use can a property can have in the future if it's redeveloped, but then the zoning also has to still be in place either to meet that land use designation, or there has to be a rezoning that the property owner has to apply for. Makes sense?
Thank you. Thank you.
Oops. Okay. Oh, now I went too quick. There. So this is the land use designations in the new OCP. And I'm just going to go clockwise from the top. Let's start at the Comox Lake drinking watershed boundary, just to highlight the key changes that have been made. So we have are mapping the Comox Lake drinking watershed boundary on our land use designation map now, and that's in recognition of the importance of the Comox Lake drinking watershed protection plan and its recommendations to limit development within the drinking watershed that provides water to all of the regional district other than Cumberland. And so it's for planning purposes, so that where we can see where a proposal might be in relation to that boundary. We've also mapped the provincial 500-meter setback guideline around the landfill cells, and that's a setback. According to provincial guidelines, there should be no sensitive uses within that setback, which is like a food processing industry, restaurant, schools, or residential use. Other uses are possible. We are proposing to change the land use designation along Cumberland Road at the entrance to Cumberland from industrial to commercial. So whether this will be translated into zoning would be addressed as part of a zoning bylaw update. The industrial uses can continue to exist as they have, but it would enable someone to rezone the property, if it's not pre-zoned, to a commercial use easier because the land use designation is already in place and wouldn't require an OCP amendment. And the thought here is that to encourage enable commercial uses along Cumberland Road, and potentially also encourage existing industrial uses to locate in the long term to the Bevan industrial area. We had multiple land use designations before for the interchange lands. So we changed that to single designation. There's a comprehensive development agreement, so an agreement on title of those lands that lays out what can happen on those lands. And it's getting, I think it's dates to 2011. So the village has changed, the needs have changed of the village. We believe the needs of the developer and interests of the developers have changed. So we feel there's a need to look at that designation again and all those lands. So the definition for the development intent of that designation states that we're inviting a land use planning process for those lands to plan them and bring them more up to date and what's more appropriate today. Down into the little inset, the downtown core, we did not change the extent of the commercial mixed use designation, which is basically corresponds more or less to the downtown commercial core and existing businesses. We did expand the mixed use designation. So the current OCP has mixed use designation on the north side of Derwent and the south side of Penrith. That's already in place. And there hasn't been much uptake or rezoning for that land. And I think as part of the zoning bylaw review, we'll see if there's an appetite to pre-zone to encourage more uptake. But what this OCP also does is extend that mixed use designation down 3rd Street and 2nd Street, where it's naturally already growing in that direction. Some businesses are establishing on 2nd and 3rd Streets. So this is to move it up one more block. And the thought behind that is, it seems follow where it's already growing naturally. There's some businesses in the lanes that are now operating as home occupations. They could set up that sort of startup type business. They could set up a full business. It also allows potentially there was pedestrianization in the future of 3rd Street. There was an interest in that expressed during phase 1 and 2 of the OCP consultations in some pedestrian-only streets. So that would enable that because Dunsmuir is such an important street to get to Comox Lake. It would be hard to just pedestrianize Dunsmuir. So that would be a potential for those streets going up the 2nd and 3rd. We're changing the institutional designation of the village properties on Dunsmuir to a mixed-use civic facilities designation, which allows a broader range of uses. The current institutional is quite limiting, so the village office is obviously permitted, the cultural center, the rec center. But because we have such a prime location, and the office building is aging, so at time of redevelopment of that site potentially in the next number of years, it's probably ways out given the funds required, but it could be redeveloped with a mixed use, so a residential above, which would fit with the rest of Dunsmuir Avenue. And then previously we just had a broad residential category aside from the infill. So now we're specifically designating the multi-unit residential areas that are already multi-unit. They were just captured under a single sort of gray, was also gray on the old plan of just a residential designation. We still have some just large lot residential, which is would still be the single detached homes on the edges of the village. We're also including an urban containment boundary that would contain growth within the area that's. I have another slide that shows our boundaries, so I'll talk that a little bit more then. And as I said, we expanded the residential infill area, so it includes all of the developed portion of Cole Valley as well. And north side of Royston Road, close to Ulverston there. We no longer have an agricultural designation, which was up north of Cole Valley. It followed roughly a soil type, but the soils in Cumberland are not fantastic for soil-based agriculture. So the thought, instead of having an agricultural area that might never be used and access is also difficult there, the OCP includes policy to increase opportunities for agriculture industrial areas, so such as non-soil-based agriculture and greenhouses. We're changing the designation that used to be recreation at Comox Lake to parks, greenways, and open space. And that's just to reflect the current use. The Comox Valley Region District purchased that land for drinking watershed protection. So that's no longer, recreation is no longer an appropriate use there. And then we're also adding a new freshwater designation, which will apply to all lakes within the village. And that allows potential zoning of those lakes to limit, for example, development on the surface of the water, like things like docks or, yeah. Okay, I bet there's probably questions here, but I'll keep going. I have 2 more slides related to land use, and then we can look at a few questions that might have come up. So the urban containment boundary, yeah, the purpose is to contain the residential growth, so specific to residential growth, not industrial or commercial. Reducing urban sprawl and maintaining the 15-minute type, 20-minute type walkability of the community for most residences. Retaining, and what that also does, it retains green space around the village, so we're preventing the village from growing around this urban containment boundary in the foreseeable future, and seeking to densify within the existing footprint. And what this also does is reduces infrastructure maintenance and replacement costs, so we're not having to build new infrastructure to service new residential areas. And then the village core land use designations here. So we extending, as already mentioned, the commercial uses, mixed use uses, up 2nd and 3rd streets. So what this also does, it facilitates, the thought behind this is also facilitating professional services, dentists, doctors, physios, to move into spaces that are not on the right on Dunsmuir, as they don't contribute the same way to animating the street as retail does or restaurants. So they're important, but they don't need to be on the main road, on the main street for the village. And they also potentially might be interested in restoring heritage buildings for an adaptive use. So that might be a very good, combination. And again, laneway businesses could then, that are kind of trying themselves, running a trial, startup little businesses as home occupations, can then actually expand to have a full business. And together with that, we're expanding the heritage conservation area, and I have a slide towards the end when I talk about development permits about that a little bit more, to include that additional mixed use area. And again, I have a slide where I'll explain a little bit more what that means. And that was discussed with the Heritage Committee. They felt if the commercial expands, then we should also expand the HCA. Okay, before I go into key policy updates, do we have any questions?
Yes, I do have a few questions here. Steve asks, are there any current active subdivision plans for the interchange lands?
No, there isn't.
Okay.
And then Matthew asks, could homes within the mixed use zone set up a business that serves customers? What are the restrictions compared to the commercial zone? He says compared to commercial.
Yeah, so the mixed use zone can have a commercial component. So the specific restrictions would be, the details of that would be in the zoning. So the zone would be different for the mixed use area than on Dunsmuir, which is currently called VCMU1. Will probably get a different name, Village Core, Commercial Core Mixed Use. So the intent is to have a somewhat different zone, not quite as intensive development to the back of the commercial lane and up 2nd and 3rd streets. But the details of what's permitted there would be in the zone. So I'm sorry, you have to attend another open house. That bylaw is coming forward fairly shortly to that draft.
Right. So the zone, that's right. Those details, that's a different document. Yes, but I'll do a plug for that. So we do have the zoning bylaw draft going to council next week. And then in early October, there will be a virtual open house and an in-person open house for the zoning bylaw. Okay, I do have a few more. I think we have time. Keep going here. Would you explain the rationale behind the large lots treatments on Mill Street north of Bruce compared to the large lots south of Bruce?
In here, I
Right.
think, right? So, yeah, so we included the lots on the north side of Bruce Street, partially because they're slightly smaller, and they correspond to the infill would correspond to also what the lots have across the street, and then the area behind stays pretty much what it is now, and the infill wouldn't be extended to those. And the reasoning we excluded certain lots from the infill is that, one, we don't need it to meet, the village doesn't need to provide for infill there to meet the housing need. It's an area that might in the future, if Cumberland Road is upgraded with maybe a turning lane, could serve a higher density potentially because they're larger lots, but that would be looked at. We have to update just the housing needs every 5 years now, and then we could look at that. That would be looked again in 5 years, whether that need is still arisen. It also provides an entrance to the village. So, I mean, the ones along Cumberland Road are, yeah, there's a lot of forest cover and help me meet the goal of our forest canopy cover goal.
Karen, I think Nigel might like to add a little more to
Yeah.
clarify his question. Nigel, do you want to put your audio on and just ask?
Sure, it's Anne, actually.
What? Okay.
That's okay. We're both here together, but I'm the one with the questions.
Great.
Yeah, I live on Mill Street, and I'm looking at the lots opposite where I live, and they are in the grey area, which to me gives a lot of uncertainty for what I will be facing across my front yard in the future. And I'm wondering why that cannot be included in some more defined zoning. So there's less ambiguity. I appreciate you saying you don't need to address those lots from a housing count or unit count perspective right now, but from a resident who lives here, I would like to know what is planned across the street.
Yeah, I mean, right now the desire is to retain them as they are, but land use does change over time. So unfortunately, there's no guarantees for the future, probably wherever you live. It's just for the time being, we did not include them in an infill area. So at the next, say there is a need for, I don't even know if there would be need in 5 years. It's possible, but that would be reviewed again with the community as well. So whether that makes sense at the time or not, there's so many ways to achieve the housing need. There could be additional multifamily lots as well, rather than extending infill. So yeah, you're right. It's hard to have certainty beyond a certain period of time and beyond the period of an OCP. And don't forget, the OCP just lays the ground for work or for what could happen, but there might not be the uptake. We also still don't know yet what uptake there will be on the infill, on infill designation, and then the infill zoning. Up to 4 units. It's quite possible people prefer to keep going what they've been doing and adding, laneway homes. And we hear from developers sometimes it's hard to make it's hard to make infill work if you have to tear down a single family home that's in good condition.
I just wanted to clarify,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure the question, just in case, just to be clear, that gray area, what it means is that those stay as large lot residential, which is what they currently are. So there's no real change proposed for those gray lots.
So so if somebody wanted to put one of the houses sells, elderly person passes, the lot changes hands, somebody wants to put a 6-story unit on one of those 1 acre lots, that kind of thing, that wouldn't be permitted. Is that what you're saying right now? Oh, under this plan?
Yeah, that's correct. That wouldn't be permitted. I know. They
So
would
what
have.
is, yeah, maybe just go over like what's permitted in the zone, in the designation that's shown as gray. Can you describe
Sure.
that?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay, 1 second. Yeah. Sec. I have the OCP lying here. I should also say, okay, 1 sec. Where is this?
I just want to say too, I really like what you're doing downtown where you're extending the professional offices into the residential area. I think that's a great idea, and not sterilizing Main Street properties. I like that.
Oh, that's
Mhm.
great. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so what I have here, this designation is intended for low density residential use. These properties are generally located outside or at the fringe of the urban containment boundary and may or may not be connected to municipal servicing.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all I needed to know. I
Wonderful.
haven't seen the document. I keep trying to get to it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Okay, so another question for Matthew. You briefly mentioned expansion of the HCA. Is this the Heritage Conservation Area? Yes. My property seems to fall under this new area, which it doesn't currently. What changed and what are the restrictions with an HCA?
Yes, so if something is within an HCA, so if you have a single family home within the HCA, that would still be exempt from having to obtain a heritage alteration permit. So it does not apply to single family residential. So if you're converting and doing an adaptive use and you're doing a commercial use, you want to do a mixed use there, then you would have to apply for heritage alteration permit.
Yeah, and so then if you're just continuing your residential use, there wouldn't be any change. Okay. Oh, and just a correction for Matthew. Matthew, do you want to hop on and speak your question? Hi, thank you.
Hi. Yeah, it's a lot easier. Thank you. So yeah, to be clear, my property doesn't currently fall under the HCA, looking at your current maps. But my question is more about has the area has expanded in this HCA, right?
Yes.
And my question is why, I guess, and what restrictions would I face now that I didn't before?
I see. Okay, so this would really affect owners who want to redevelop their property to make use of the mixed use or add commercial. So if you can contain this within the existing building and you just doing this inside and you're doing an adaptive use of your say a home, say with a doctor's office, there may be you would probably still have to do a building. You still just need to do a building permit application as anybody. But as soon as you're making changes on the outside, you're changing the use, you're making changes on the outside, you have to apply for heritage alteration permit. So that's also for if people redeveloped, since there's mixed use, it would have higher densities if people redevelop a property with say a ground floor commercial and a few units above. They would have to obtain a heritage alteration permit, and that would look at the form and character and how does it fit within the buildings, fit within the neighborhood.
Thank you. My other question was, why has this area expanded?
Yes, that's right. It's because we are expanding or permitting the commercial use to expand in that area. So we want this to be
What does that have to do with heritage? Sorry.
There's actually quite a few heritage homes in that area, and yes, so there's a few heritage homes in that area, but the heritage alteration permit actually applies to both heritage homes and new constructions. So in some ways, the name is a misnomer because for new construction, it's not so much about the heritage of the existing building, of the new building, but how it interacts with the streetscape and how it fits into the into the street and how it respects maybe adjacent heritage buildings. For example, carrying through a cornice line or reflecting some of the window patterns that are common in the downtown core, having a setback entrance way and a recessed entrance. Those are some kind of characteristics of the heritage conservation area, the downtown core.
I'm sorry, I think I missed a bit where you explained why the area had expanded. Sorry.
The area it's expanded to fold in new potential redevelopment with new mixed uses, to fold that in and
Right.
have
Sorry,
and
you
be
did
part
say.
of the downtown core, and be congruent and complement that area of the downtown core. So you know what, a heritage alteration permit, like I said, in some ways, the name is unfortunate because it also applies to new builds, and one can also think of it in some ways like a commercial development permit. It's really to make sure the form and character of the development fits with what you already have, which respects the public realm, creates perhaps spaces, setbacks for outdoor seating, that kind of thing. Or
Karen, and we've talked about this so much over the past couple of years, maybe
Yeah.
Karen can share a little bit more insight about why it's expanding up 2nd and 3rd Street, because that is where it's expanding, right? Just up 2nd and 3rd.
It's the south side of Penrith is where my place is, and it's not currently listed as like a heritage area, whereas in these new plans it is, and I was surprised, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we reviewed this together with the Heritage Committee, and the if there's a commercial use or those properties are redeveloped, they have been mixed use in the current OCP. They're also mixed use. If those properties are redeveloped with a commercial mixed use or a standalone commercial use, then the thought is that they should be integrated into the larger commercial area, and the heritage alteration permit would help with that. The heritage conservation area guidelines help with that integration.
So it's like a retrospective thing because you want to densify the downtown core, or rather allow it to be redeveloped, but in a way that's sympathetic to the rest of the village.
Yeah, specifically sympathetic to the rest of the downtown core. Yeah.
Okay, I won't take up any more time of yours. Thank you. But yeah, thanks.
Great. We just have one more question for this section from Steve. What protections are afforded to aquatic ecosystem areas?
Yeah, we'll get to that perhaps with the when we get to the development permit areas.
Yeah, let's hold that one. That's a good
Yeah?
point. Yeah.
I wrote a question in there. I don't know if you saw it or if it was skipped for later. Just wondering about how the interchange lands are excluded from the urban containment boundary for the majority of them, and just help me understand a little bit about what that
Yes.
means for those lands, and yeah.
Thanks, Ian. I did just gonna scroll past that one. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
That's right. So the interchange lands are outside the urban containment boundary. What is the impact of that? Yeah.
Yeah. The village had a complete communities assessment done also in 2024, which fed into this OCP and the OCP policy. And the focus of that was really to try and densify within largely walking distance. And the interchange lands are really on the fringe of that. Like I said earlier, we don't need them for the housing need. We don't really want to detract from the commercial core, the downtown commercial core, through development of those lands. So there's some caution, I suppose, in the development potential that those lands are receiving under this OCP, future development potential. But as you see, we did include a certain portion which we felt on this side of the highway. It made more sense to develop those first. So that's also an indication to the owner that that's an area where development of the interchange lands would be more favorably seen. That makes sense? Do you want to add to that, Courtney?
Well, sure. I think the short answer is no change currently because the development covenant is in place still, so really no immediate change. But it signals direction for the future if there's any like replanning of that area. That currently, with our current housing needs, that area is not needed to meet our 20-year housing needs.
Also, it's not serviced right now. There's no sewer out there or water or anything.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. I do see one more question, but looking at the time, I'm going to suggest we continue and then we'll come back to that question.
Okay.
Actually, a couple more questions about the urban containment boundary, but I think we'll leave those to the end. We will have time, but let's just make sure, I think, to get through the rest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I tried to highlight just some key policy updates. The OCP, the draft it's a long document, but we also, I should say, did keep quite a few of the existing policies, the policies in the existing OCP. It is a good OCP. We felt it's generally a strong OCP, it's just in some places out of date. So environmental protection remains a priority, and we really kept most of the objectives and policies in the current OCP. Added some policy on the urban forest, as we now have an urban forest management plan, which we didn't when we had at the time the previous OCP. We added policy to guide protection of viewscapes. So this right now is more of a guidance when we look at development applications or subdivisions, to keep in our mind as the village develops. It starts to get more and more important to think of some of those viewscapes that we're enjoying from the village core. So a tool at subdivision. And we produced this map B, which includes the active transportation network, parks and trails. And the active transportation network is from the 2024 transportation master plan. Includes parks and trails proposed and existing. Conservation lands, so these are recognized to having specific high conservation values. Includes the Bevan Migration Corridor from Comox Lake to Morrison Creek watershed, which is identified in Natures Without Borders, and also came up during our Bevan discussions on and consultations on the Bevan land use concept plan, and then all lakes, wetland streams, including buffers around them. So housing, the objectives and policies in the housing section support greater housing diversity. So I have a little graph there that shows you that we're really quite low on multi-unit residential, which are more affordable either for rentals or also for people who are getting into the market by buying a condominium. We're still predominantly single detached homes with a secondary suite, and there's certainly a place for them, and I think they will continue to exist. But really increasing diversity is so important to have some entry-level housing and to accommodate people who are looking for rentals. One policy also to look at integrating more rental tenure zoning by time of zoning bylaw update, and finding ways to reduce barriers for non-market housing. And specific to that, some of the things we're exploring, the OCP suggests to explore is non-marketing housing component as part of future redevelopment of civic property. So if you have a mixed-use building in the long term where the current municipal hall is, with municipal at the bottom, we may be able to have a partnership with a housing provider or in BC Housing for some affordable units above. Rossland did that not so long ago, so that's a great example. Looking at also as part of the zoning bylaw review, reducing parking requirement for non-market housing for non-market housing as vehicle ownership tends to be lower, and that reduces one more barrier, and also advocacy for additional transit connections into Courtney, as that is difficult for people who may not be able to afford vehicles. So some of the key updates. Oh, why did I? Oh, I jumped quite a ways back. That's interesting. How did I manage to do that? Excellent. Okay, one sec. Here. Okay, so transportation connectivity. So we have as I said, we have a transportation master plan. And this particular schedule to the OCP, this map C, maps the future major roads that are in that plan. So the active transportation network is on the Parks Green Base map. The future road connections are shown on this map, as are sewer water systems proposed and existing. And this is a requirement of local governments to include in their official community plans. Economic development, during phase 2 of the OCP review, we had an engagement. We had a local economy workshop. So this is based on the feedback we got on that workshop. Some of the key policy updates, changes, they're not necessarily changes. Some of this was already there, but emphasis on local businesses and supporting local businesses. Rather than a focus on getting more tourists, the focus is shifting to getting more value from existing tourism, especially through overnight stays, so accommodation, providing accommodation and attracting hotels and other types of accommodation for tourists. More affordable and diverse housing options. Here's the housing, again, is super important to local businesses to attract and retain employees. Local economy, local food production was part of the previous OCP, part of the local economy. So the village has done a lot in its existing zoning bylaw, permitting urban agriculture, keeping of hens in the backyard, honeybees, allowing farm gate sales. So that's already all in our zoning bylaw. But what we're hoping to do with this OCP is set the ground to the basis for an update to the zoning bylaw to also look at post-production facilities for local food production and permitting some, as I mentioned, when we looked at land use designation map, permitting greenhouses and local food, post-production facilities in light industrial areas. Recognize the role of the arts and culture industries in a strong local economy. That came up during local economy workshop very strongly, the partnerships that exist there between local businesses and arts and culture. And reviewing the zoning regulations, and I've started that to allow for diversity of spaces for business startups and shared spaces, update the home occupation regulations to ensure we're encouraging home occupations and we make it a little easier, and making the requirements fit the type of home occupation a little bit better. Some home occupations are very low impact, so we could reduce the requirements for those. Looking at reducing potentially parking requirements for new commercial tenants in the downtown core, and like I said, non-soil-based agriculture in industrial zones. Okay, then we have diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it was in the previous OCP, but not as explicitly. So we have a specific section on this now to emphasize the importance to the village to remove barriers to people of all ages, backgrounds, ability, gender, sexual orientation, and make sure they have equitable access to village services, programs, and facilities. And as part of that, one of the projects that the village is starting, and it's also captured in the OCP, is an accessibility and inclusion assessment and action plan for how we deliver our municipal services. Again, housing is so important also for this particular topic, to permit aging in place. Housing diversity is so important, so seniors can downsize and move into a smaller space but stay within their community. Having sufficient long-term rentals and affordable starter homes, so smaller homes, townhouses, condos. And then one that's close to our heart and planning staff is an update to the village's street naming policy. It's somewhat colonial, and we think it should reflect the village's diversity, and this came also up in our discussion with the Heritage Committee. Okay, I think this is the last slide in the policy section. So recreation parks. So the OCP recognizes the role of the new regional parks service that now applies to some types of acquisition that Cumberland is also part of, and the future regional parks plan. It also recognizes and picks up some of the climate action plan actions. Specifically here, I mentioned reducing recreation facility related greenhouse gas emissions when those facilities are upgraded or replaced in the future. Develop a long range recreational facility plans as a key policy, and then to update the village's parks and green waste master plan. Okay. And I think,
All right.
yeah, so was there questions on that section?
Yeah, there's one question is, does the draft OCP allow small greenhouses or hothouses in residential areas?
You know, that would be an OCP, that would be a zoning bylaw regulation. So the OCP does not explicitly state that they're allowed or not allowed currently.
Great. And, I think I will bounce, we're doing good for time. I think I will bounce back to the urban containment boundary question before we continue on, which is, how was the urban containment boundary defined?
Okay. The urban containment boundary we developed that with urban systems when they worked on our complete communities assessment. And some of the key considerations are whether lots are serviced or not, whether they are within walking distance, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes of the downtown core and key services. So is that area walkable? Those are kind of really the two key considerations.
And then also, we kind of ran it through a test. Is this area big enough to meet our 20-year housing need?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
just to
Yeah.
clarify on that for council, so hypothetically, and this is completely hypothetical, we get a proposal, it looks decent, it aligns with generally within the community. To do that isn't a big stretch. Like this is, we obviously, the urban containment boundaries obviously been created with a lot of foresight and a lot of forethought. But if there's something that comes up, we can still say, well, we might push this out without opening ourselves up to absolutely every other developer in the valley who's like, oh, well, you made an exception for them, but you're not doing it for us. There's a danger in there, or a legal danger.
Well, I think the technical answer is council can amend your bylaws at any time. And that would be amending the bylaw. So that's the technical answer. There's sort of no technical reason why you couldn't do that. And we can never anticipate any possible good reason to change that containment boundary. But the other answer is that like planning staff will use this urban containment boundary. This will be like, the community's looked at it. We've made various recommendations, but in the end, council adopted the bylaw that has this containment boundary. So when people come to the front desk, say, hey, I own this property way over here. It's not in the containment boundary. I'm thinking of this big development. Then we generally say to them, well, you are allowed to make the application, but we just updated this OCP and this is what the result was. So it's, not very likely. That's the kind of message we give people.
No, it's something for us to consider, especially, we all know there's a lot of growth pressure in Cumberland and that, and I like a good urban containment boundary. This is my position on this is, it's nice to have that sharp line, say, well, why don't we finish off everything within this line before we go help ourselves to another piece of the pie outside that leads to sprawl. There's good reasons behind it. I'm curious. I was just curious as far as for us to use it as a guideline, how that looks to us. But
Mhm.
you've answered the question quite well. Thank you.
Yeah, and I suppose it does make it more difficult to achieve an OCP amendment. The applicant would have to demonstrate how this fits within the goals of the urban containment boundary.
Okay, one last question before you move on. As the OCP is an aspirational document in many ways, is there any new language about encouraging new school development or to prioritize the development of a secondary school? Is there new education or institution land use designations? Ah, good question. We've talked about this.
Mhm. So the OCP does have a policy on school sites, and but we've also made note of this. We recently received a comment on this by someone by email as well. Great question. So I think we can add another policy to make this a little bit stronger. But there's one policy in the OCP that to work with the school district on identifying potential use sites. It's not that every day there's a potential for a new site, so that might have to be at a larger subdivision. So there's a challenge to do that, but for sure, it's an important policy to add and strengthen what we have currently.
All right, no more questions.
Oh, I should say, sorry, there's a second portion of this, is there new education institutional
yes.
designations. So we did expand, there's some institutional land on Union Road, of course, which might not be ideal for a school. The civic mixed use area would allow educational institution. And you know what? Well, we are referring this to the school district. So if they have an eye on something, interested in something, then we also hope to hear from them.
Yeah, but we haven't pre-selected
No.
any location and then does it designated it for that at this point.
Mhm. Okay.
Take it away.
Yeah. So the last section is on the development permit areas, heritage conservation area. All right. So for those, we have a very knowledgeable audience, but just to review what development permit areas do, Cumberland has 9 and has 1 heritage conservation area downtown. But the purpose is for the guidelines to protect the environment, especially for, of course, the environmental development permit areas. I have the first 4 are related to the environment. Protect people and property from natural hazards, and then for those form and character development permit areas, guide the form and character of multi-unit residential, commercial, industrial developments. Landowners, when they apply, make an application for development, they need this permit prior to being able to alter or subdivide land and or construct, add to, or alter a building. The heritage conservation area, and those guidelines are, it's a type of development permit area for area with heritage value, and guides the renovation to existing buildings and new construction. Specifically commercial mixed use buildings, not single residential. So DPA 1, so we've updated the map for the environmental protection development permit area with more current sensitive ecosystem inventory mapping. Our mapping is done by the Comox Valley Region District, so they have access to that. It still includes all the aquatic ecosystem, terrestrial ecosystems that we had before, plus we've identified a couple others. And it still also includes connectivity areas. So the connectivity areas is the remainder of the village of the landmass of the village that's not presently developed. So you see the gray blobs is developed area that, and the if there's a ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem or terrestrial ecosystem area over top of those, that would apply, as you see on some of the Bevan lands there. Right. And then the connectivity area would it fills in the rest, and the connectivity area allows the village to put conditions in place and have requirements for restoration of land that is not necessarily a sensitive ecosystem, but contributes to conservation on a larger scale. So we have had legal review of those guidelines, as we have of all development permit area guidelines, I should say, because they are regulatory. We've reduced the duplication of the guidelines. So if you just do a page count, I think there's less pages now. And that's because we found that aquatic ecosystems and terrestrial ecosystem guidelines were really very much the same. So we grouped them into one, because what we found is applicants fill out one and they say, ditto, 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 look here, look there, because we create checklists for these. So they are now in one section. The connectivity area still has its own section. The legal review informed us that some of the, I should not say a lot, but some of the guidelines were actually conditions that should be in the permits and not part of the guidelines. So if you're required to fence around all mature trees to protect the root zone during construction, you put that as a condition of the permit, and then that gets checked as part of when you review, you do site visits and inspection of the site. So it's not useful to have that necessarily as a guideline. The guideline would be to protect mature trees more broadly, and then the how is a condition, and that will then be in the permit. We've also added new guidelines on docks and shoreline protection devices, which mostly affect Comox Lake. Okay, so groundwater protection. So there's a fairly large change. We had mapped the provincially mapped aquifer before in our development permit area for groundwater protection, but we did not have, but the groundwater protection development permit was only required for the village drinking water supply area, which is the hatched area above yellow. So we're still requiring that groundwater DP for that area, but we added the industrial lands and gas stations to that permit requirement. And the reason being, we took a closer look at that aquifer, and the background information on the aquifer, and it's an unconfined aquifer, which means it's open to the surface. There's no confining layer that would prevent any contaminants from the surface to enter the aquifer. So we felt there was extra caution required in this in industrial areas, gas stations, so more higher impact types of development. And this could be then looked at subdivision when the proposed uses in those areas. Yeah, so the focus of the guidelines is really on preventing effluent going directly to the ground. They do permit the village to require risk assessment and mitigation report if we feel that's warranted. There's a minimum requirement for two-stage septic systems where there's no sewer, which we have in some parts of the industrial area. And over the long term, once that's all connected to sewer, that will alleviate any potential risk there. And there's also some additional guidelines on stormwater management to protect the aquifer. All right. Wildland urban interface. So really anything outside the village is now part of this development permit area requirement. And the undeveloped, so it's all undeveloped land. And then we included a buffer into the village core, which is developed. So that means for homeowners within that buffer, if they're wanting to, if they're applying for a building permit, and they say they're rebuilding their roof completely, and new trusses, rebuilding the roof and covering the roof, then they'd have to use a fire-resistant material, for example, on the roof and on the gutters. So you couldn't do wood shingle roof in that area, and that's just to help with help the fire department with a fire break from the surrounding forests. It does exclude parks because there's no really measurable development within parks. So that's some white areas that are not included. So there's guidelines for subdivision layout, and then some fire smart guidelines for private property development. Okay, form character. So this applies to all the form character development permits. So we really try to illustrate our guidelines better with some images that try to explain what we are looking for. The requirement, you will see there's no more requirement for stormwater management, sediment, and erosion plans in those development permits, and that's because we're looking at them now at building permit stage when the building footprint is known. So the requirements have not been reduced. We're just putting them at to a phase where it makes more sense and we know more about what's planned on the property. Key changes also for all of them, just some fire smart guidelines for landscaping. And then the specifics, so industrial commercial, because we are designating the lands along Cumberland Road as commercial, but there's still existing industrial, both development permits are active on those lands. It depends which one kicks in, depends on the type of development. All of them are trying to have more pedestrian-friendly parking lots. If there's large parking lots, landscape and having parking lots broken down with landscaping, bioswales for stormwater management. Requirement to articulate building fronts for more interest from the street, including treatment of large blank walls. There's some more specifics on landscape buffers. We added under encouragement for green roofs, and we cannot grant a 5% variance to lot coverage. That's up to council. However, if council accepts this guideline as part of the OCP update, that gives a signal to a developer that there's a potential for variance, so they could maybe get more lot coverage if they add a green roof. Multi-unit residential mixed use, that was previously two different development permit areas. We combined them because they're so similar. And sometimes you have a standalone residential units within a mixed use unit, then they had mixed use development, then they had to apply those other permits requirements. It got really confusing what applies where. So it made sense to combine them. They were very similar, but there's a few guidelines just very specific to mixed use also included within these. And again, similar to the industrial ones, the pedestrian friendly and the importance of the public common space and the public realm. All right, and so heritage conservation area, we're coming to an end. So as we mentioned before, it applies to the existing downtown commercial core, plus now the mixed use area south side of Penrith, north side of Derwent, and up 2nd and 3rd Streets. Does not apply to single residential or any upgrades people doing to their homes, accessory dwelling units, laneway homes. So it's really applies when a property there gets redeveloped for mixed use. There's now more exemptions for repair and maintenance of buildings. Within the HCA Heritage Conservation Area, we're less strict on materials. So vinyl windows were outright forbidden before, and development permit guidelines cannot be varied. So really, no vinyl windows were possible. But in new builds, that was in existing buildings. So, but perhaps on the 2nd, 3rd story, that's okay. It still requires a heritage alteration permit to look at that. We did completely exempt replacement with fiber cement siding, which is more fire smart. As long as the look is preserved, that's an exemption. And the guidelines are clear on requirements for new construction with existing buildings. We added some more specificity to the guideline on building massing to help council make decisions of whether a building respects the rest of the streetscape and review massing of the building in relation to adjacent buildings. And there's now a list of heritage properties, which means if the property is listed as a heritage property having specific heritage value, that means automatically has access to some different more relaxed requirements in the BC Building Code. It does also mean that those buildings, owners of those buildings, besides having access to building code, they would have to apply. They would have to meet all the heritage alteration permit requirements as all the other buildings. It also would mean you can't demolish a building without a heritage alteration permit, which is also the case for the heritage conservation area in the heritage conservation area. So it also just gives a little bit more of an idea of what is valued within the village, which also when a developers come in who build a new building, they can look at the list of heritage properties to see how the new building can respect that heritage form and how it can best be sympathetic to those the heritage buildings. I should say, however, that we did recognize, and this is also in discussion with the Heritage Committee, that the heritage conservation area is eclectic. The buildings are eclectic. There's no single color scheme. We stayed away from that. I mean, different colors, bright colors are all welcome. So the guidelines do not prescribe that people renovate or build a new building to reflect a certain era.
I thought they were all supposed to be like that, orangey with the dark green and brown. No, I'm just kidding. Anything but that. We got a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's where this does put us. Yeah, questions, comments, and now I have to figure out how to end the recording. Give me a second here.
While you're doing that, I'll start with just to mention the comment from Lindsay that articulation is hard to achieve with step code requirements. Similarly, green roofs can be a barrier to insurance and have considerable maintenance requirements. I'd suggest these both be as flexible as possible. Yeah, that's